Their numbers have been greatly reduced in recent years. Some of the herds have been completely eliminated.
The wild horse is being singled out for just about every problem that is happening ecologically in the western part of the United States.
So many wild horses have been removed that there are now more Mustangs in federal housing than there are on the range.
The Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, says it may have to begin killing wild horses to deal with a surplus of horses in holding facilities.
It's kind of odd that suddenly a federal agency or any agency feels so bad for wildlife that they have to round them up and kill them. I just don't buy it.
We ought to be wise about how we, use our own resources. I think it'd be a powerful signal if we announce that we're going to, really get after it when it comes to oil shale. There's enormous reserves in the western states.
The Bureau of Land Management is a significant contributor to the nation's energy supply and a leader in environmentally responsible development.
The BLM has a built-in conflict of interest.
The reason we're in this position is simply because of a horrendous management of the program by the Bureau of Land Management.
I would think that a year would be enough time to find out what killed 71 wild horses around the water hole in the Nevada desert, but it's not enough time for the BLM.
And if there's not enough water on the range, why aren't other animals taken off? And it's just very bizarre.
I've got pictures of where wild horses lying dead outside barbed wire fences and the cattle well watered and fed inside the fencing.
We as Americans need to think about what we're doing with our heritage and how we treat the horse that we rode in on.
The wild horse and Mustang are the symbol of American spirit.
Where are they going? What's happening? Is it a disappearing piece of our national heritage?
BLM captures about 10 to 12,000 horses a year, about half of them in Nevada alone. Not enough, according to ranchers who graze cows on the same public land used by wild horses.
There is approximately 8 million cattle on public lands compared to 20,000 horses.
It's difficult to believe that these public lands can support that many cows, but there's a problem in 20,000 some horses. It just doesn't make sense. Cows are not removed when there's during times of drought, and they're certainly not wildlife, but they're the animals that people say wild horses are stealing food from.
With every roundup, centuries of natural evolution are being erased.
These are herd animals in social groups, and they're suffering every time they're removed from their home territory and from their family.
The gathering situation through helicopters, it's very hard on those horses. You've got to be able to gather them without running these wild horses to death.
But you can't just keep putting them in feedlots. All they're doing is waiting to die.
In 1971, the Wild Free-Roaming Horse and Burro Act was passed to protect these creatures from further exploitation. However, in 2005, the Burns Amendment completely destroyed that protection. The Burns Amendment actually requires the Bureau of Land Management that they shall continue to remove, without limitation, all excess animals until they are disposed of.
Former Montana Senator Conrad Burns called for the sale of wild horses to be sold to the lowest bidder, which meant that they could be sold to the slaughterhouse.
Population control can be accomplished without sending multitudes of horses to slaughter.
But that would be very sad for the people around here to know that these horses could be sold.
We're only dealing with adoptions here.
You're being very diplomatic.
Yes, I like the horse program and I like my job.
What happens with a lot of BLM adoptions, novice horse people will get a horse that's not suitable for riding, and they don't have any other use for it.
September of 2003 marked what may be the largest horse neglect case in U.S. history. 125 wild Mustangs arrived at Return to Freedom. They were emaciated, many of them sick. A private rancher had received over 700 Mustangs from the state of Nevada. In an effort to get rid of horses from the range, they're made available to just about anyone.
The system is broken. They're not managing it properly. And, you know, sadly, in the last 10 years, it's gotten even worse.
It costs the government $1,500 to gather one wild horse. There are an awful lot of people who make their living as wild horse specialists, all of who are making money on the wild horse, and I would suspect that not all of them really want a solution.
Lobbies have really become entrenched. Gas and oil and cattle and so on have really made a move to take over public lands during the past 8 years under the Bush administration.
And so part of our strategy in our country has got to be to say, okay, here are some, suspected reserves, and that we ought to go after them in an environmentally friendly way. Congress needs to get moving on it.
We've done more to destroy the American West in the 200 years that we settled it than the Indians did for the 2,000 years that they lived there.
The horse is North America's gift to the world. What does it say about us if we aren't able to preserve the greatest icon of freedom that there ever was?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, our esteemed panel, wild horse advocates everywhere thanks to streaming going on, and also to our fellow tax-paying Americans. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our volunteer moderator and facilitator for our press conference today. And as you are all aware, we are here collectively to call upon the BLM, the Department of Interior, and the Obama administration to cease and desist with these costly and unnecessary wild horse roundups. And no one has done a better job. And no one has done a better job of putting a face and a personal name on the American wild horses than our moderator. 16 years ago this month, a true pioneer woman has been living with and observing the wild horse families of the Arrowhead Mountains in Montana and sharing her experiences with the world via 3 Emmy Award PBS documentaries. I am proud to introduce the ever-attentive godmother of Cloud, the wild stallion of the Rockies, and my personal friend, Ginger Catherine. Thank you.
Thanks, RT. And welcome, everybody. I'm glad you could make it. This is an eventful time. I think we're on the cusp of potential greatness. But we all are here with, as RT said, one voice. 16 years ago, I happened to wander into a place called the Pryor Mountains. And I didn't know anything about wild horses. I was hired to do this by Marty Stauffer, who was the producer of Wild America. And I was totally and completely ignorant, but I had the opportunity to learn from a black stallion named Raven. And he, for some reason, allowed me to trail along with his family. And I learned what wild horses value most, and that is freedom and family. And we're assembled here because we care about these animals. I think everyone in this audience cares very deeply about our wild horses and burros on public lands. And the speakers you're going to hear today care just as deeply as I do. We're going to set some ground rules. We're going to have 5 speakers today. And I'm going to introduce those speakers. They're going to speak, and then I'll introduce the next speaker. I'd like for you to hold your questions, members of the press, until everyone has spoken, and then we will take questions first from the press, and then we will take questions from the general audience. The first person to speak is someone who really needs no introduction. Beyond being married to a very, very wealthy man, she is a person of courage on her own, who has stepped forward offering plans to try to rescue horses that are in costly holding that have been unjustly removed from their homes. And her name is Madeline Pickens, and I present her to you now.
Catherine, you're my hero. Thank you. She gave me 3 minutes, but I've asked for 4. Okay. Got my glasses on too. Here we go. We're delighted by the BLM's commitment to a new direction for the management of America's wild horses and burros. The initiative could not come at a more opportune and critical time. Last November, Americans spoke at the ballot box, stating clearly that their tolerance for wasteful government spending has come to an end. It is no longer acceptable to remove mustangs from public lands to make room for private livestock grazing, and then send taxpayers the bill for the roundups and for the subsidies that public land ranchers enjoy. It is no longer acceptable to offer long-term holding as a long-term solution and send taxpayers the bill for lucrative contracts with private ranchers in the Midwest to house mustangs removed from the public lands in the West. Keeping wild horses free on the range where they require no funding for room and board is just common sense. I appreciate Bob Abbey's leadership in finding a more rational approach, and I look forward to meeting with him toward that goal. The proposed strategy offers small step forwards, but more than words will be required to achieve real reform. I am troubled by the fact that under the new strategy, 32,800 more Mustangs will be removed from the range over the next 4 years, boosting the holding population to more than 51,000. This perpetuates the same failed approach that's gotten us nowhere today. Why keep talking about reform when change can be implemented now? Let's bring the number of horses removed in line with adoption demand, not 5 or 10 years from now, but now, and increase the numbers of mares inoculated with fertility control to a level that will actually make a difference in reproductive rates. We must also take a critical look at the foundation of this program. Appropriate management level, or AML. You can't build a house on a shaky foundation, yet that's what this program is trying to do. The quest to attain AML continues, even though these appropriate management levels are neither appropriate nor scientifically based. And we look to reinstating, to the extent possible, the 21 million acres of wild horse habitat that has been zeroed out over the past 4 decades. After 4 decades of controversy, it's time to fix this problem once and for all. I stand before you with resources and commitment to get this job done. My nonprofit, Saving America's Mustangs Foundation, has a pilot program ready to go on the 2 ranches in northern Nevada that I purchased last year. We will take 1,000 horses out of short-term holding where they are costing taxpayers $2,500 per year per horse. And we will house them at $475 per year per horse. That's a cost saving of more than $2 million just for the first year of the pilot program. I'm committed to purchasing more land in the future so that at some point we will be able to take the entire 12,000 currently in short-term holding. Only then can we truly say we have solved this part of the problem. This is not a problem that can be passed along to well-meaning charities or private parties without government support. We all know of sanctuaries that have been started with the best intentions but found themselves in dire financial straits due to unforeseen circumstances like illness or a bad economy. We also know of too many wild horse adoptions gone bad and mustangs ending up on the open market, eventually making their way to slaughter plants in Mexico and Canada. After removing these horses from the public lands where they lived peacefully and cost taxpayers nothing, the government has a moral obligation and a fiscal responsibility to care for them. Saving America's mustangs guarantees that these horses a safe and humane future while offering a return on the public's investment. We will provide a destination where citizens can visit, learn about, and enjoy these majestic animals in a natural setting. Our top priority is and always will be protection of the horses and the land. This cost-saving option was available to the BLM in January when it proceeded with the antelope roundup, removing mustangs from lands amidst and adjacent to the proposed eco-sanctuary and shipping them to distant and expensive holding facilities rather than housing them close to home. And it's available to the BLM now, so let's stop talking about reform and start implementing it. I encourage all of us, wild horse advocates, public lands ranchers, cattlemen, and our senators and congressmen, the BLM and others, to stand together behind Director Bob Abbey in his attempt to bring badly needed change to this program. And I encourage Director Abbey to be bold in implementing change right now and looking at wild horses in the wild as a national treasure they truly are. It's time to stop talking about this problem and start doing something, beginning with a solution that is available right now. No matter how diverse our points of view are, we all agree that the government cannot continue to spend money to remove and warehouse wild horses any longer. Let's work to put our collective energy and resources together to lobby for the legislative and policy changes necessary to support Bob Abbey and get this job done. I just want to clarify a couple of things. Bob Abbey spoke today at the subcommittee for the appropriations for the Interior Department and mentioned several issues when the subject was brought up about private partnerships and especially Sam and Madeline Pickens. And one of the things he mentioned was that they had not received a plan from us, a proposal. We put in 2 proposals, and you know, you can keep proposing something and there'll always be somebody putting a stumbling block or a what if and a what if. You know what? What if a meteorite landed on this earth? You know, what if it lands in New York? What if it lands in Phoenix? What if it lands in Utah or Nevada? We don't know. And you cannot put a paper together that covers everything. So I encourage them to just try to get on a page with us and try to make this work. It's not a popular issue and it needs to go away, but we have a beautiful resource in this country and it's called the American Mustang. Let's stick together. Let's continue to try to get this done. You know what was fascinating to me? I saw Senator Reid, and he was discussing part of Nevada, Elko County, the other night, and he was talking about how much he enjoyed the arts and how important the cowboy poetry was. But it's costing money to the taxpayers, and I don't think the taxpayers want to pay it anymore. Well, Senator Reid, this is a most wonderful opportunity for Sam once again. We're an eco-sanctuary. We'll be able to support cowboy poetry. You know, it's just one more thing that we show the beautiful West. So you see, Senator, we're on the same page. We've got to get the Bureau of Land Management on the page with us, and I think we all need to support Bob Abbey, encourage him to really come and feel what it's like on our property. Go out, see the wild horses, and join us. We must save this resource before it's gone forever. Thank you.
I failed to recognize some of the people in the audience, but you know, every one of you is so important that I can't, I would take all the time doing that. When RT mentioned that I've been involved in this since 1994, that may seem like a long time ago, but Craig, would you stand up? Nearly all of Craig's adult life has been involved in the preservation of wild horses and burros on our public lands. You and I went out looking for burros once, and you got me stuck in that sand, didn't you? Yeah. But there are other groups that are represented, you know, ASPCA, AWHPC, and others that I'm not mentioning, and forgive me for forgetting. The next speaker is a friend of mine. In 2009, in September of 2009, the BLM decided that they were going to have a massive roundup in the Prairie Mountains. And we said, no, you're not. And they said, yes, we are. And they proceeded. And it was quite a show of law enforcement strength at this roundup. And the BLM was particularly combative with those of us who were simply there trying to stand up for the wild horses. And I met this man who drove in with his wife, you know, and he had this black cowboy hat on. And he said his name was R.T. Finch. And during the course of that roundup, I got to know this fellow. And I got to trust this fellow. And I got to rely on this fellow because I really felt like I don't want to say my life was in danger, but I did feel like that sometimes. And so having RT there gave me the strength to carry on, and I'll be forever grateful to him. He's a fabulous writer. He wrote Straight from the Horse's Heart. If you haven't read that, it's just a wonderful book. And he has a wonderful blog, and he just has such a skill with writing. And so here's RT.
Thank you, Ginger. Got so much to share in so little time. I actually timed my speech, and I'll speak as quickly. You're as bad as the woman I'm married to, because I was 13 and I tried to get it down. But I will tell you that I stand before all of you today somewhat raw and bruised from our recent visit and stay out to the Antelope Complex, where my wife Terry, myself, joined Laura Lee for the final week of the Antelope Roundup. At that time, Laura had spent the entire time there. She was there in advance, and how she did it, I do not know. But you've all seen the videos. You've all seen the photographs of the abuse that our national icons go through at the hand of the BLM and their contractors during what they refer to as wild horse gathering. And I don't have the time to go down the list of what we saw. It's all out there. But I would like to share with you one experience that kind of struck us between the eyes, and it struck us hard. After listening to the BLM PR people tell us that that particular HMA was not a grazing HMA, and that they were removing these few horses because there were 5 times more horses than 1.3 million acres could sustain. And one day as we left that HMA, we crested over a hill and found ourselves flat in the middle of a herd of hundreds of private cattle. I have nothing against cattle, and I have nothing against ranchers at all, because I come from Texas and all my neighbors are ranchers, but the difference is they pay taxes, they take care and maintain their property. It's not public land, it's their private land. And as we worked our way through that herd and got to the very back, there was a woman in a truck that was helping to drive the herd along with the horseback wranglers, and she stopped us. And she asked us what we were doing out there, what civilians were doing on the land, and we tried to explain to her that just over the hill, the BLM was rounding up, in our opinion, illegally rounding up federally protected wild horses. And she stopped me mid-sentence and said, good, and put the truck in gear. I reached over for the gear shift on that car to put it in reverse, and that woman stopped me and said, wrong place, wrong time, outnumbered, outgunned. So I did not stand up for the horses that night. But the following day, we drove on the same land that only a few short days prior we stopped, and we could witness and photograph the beauty of wild horses in the distance. And that entire landscape was modeled and covered with welfare cattle. And it made me think of something. It made me think, go back to that movie of The Karate Kid, when Mr. Miyagi was teaching coordination to his students. And he said, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off, and I practiced doing this so I could do it in front of you today. But what reminded me of that is the BLM mantra seems to be private cattle on, wild horses off. Private cattle on, wild horses off, and they're not real coordinated because they can't get their numbers right. So today, we have a message that we need to take when we go to the BLM Advisory Board, and that message is twofold. Number one, we know where you're coming from. We know the mantra, private cattle on or wild horses off. But above that, the message that we united need to make is that the roundups need to stop. It's time to put science in front of special interests. And we as taxpaying Americans need to pull the plug on the wild horse harvesting machine, and we need to do it now. In the name of God, in the name of this country, these roundups need to stop.
Thanks, RT. I want to talk to you about your energy level, though. To kind of lift your energy level, kind of flat. Well, I don't know how you go from top runway model to being here today for this press conference, but Simone Netherlands is here. And no, you don't have the legs for it. Simone Netherlands has respect for horses, as most of you know, and her claim to fame, I guess, is that she got accosted by Sue Wallace. She's always after fame, you know. But it's my pleasure to introduce her to you today, and I'm sure you'll enjoy what she has to say. Simone?
So this is an issue of major concern to every single American, to every single taxpayer, because these are our public lands. And it is not just our wild horses that are the victim of our federal government. We should be concerned with our environment on our public lands. We should be concerned with our water supplies, our wildlife. Literally everything takes a back seat to mining interests, to cattle interests, to gas pipelines. And if we don't stand up and do something and let our government know that our public lands are important to us as they are, as pristine wildernesses, and not to sell them off to the highest bidder, they are going to be turned into giant, filthy cattle farms scattered with gas pipelines and giant mining pits. That's why we're all here today. None of us stand to gain anything from standing up for the defenseless. And we have all been there. The BLM has a great PR firm whose job it is to make the American public think that they're honest-to-goodness heroes, saving wild horses from starvation and dehydration, saving the range from deterioration, adopting the wild horses out. Well, we're here to tell you that we have been keeping an eye on them for decades. Okay, we have people here who have literally documented what has been going on for decades and decades. We have all been at the roundups. We have seen the cruelty. We have seen how they run pregnant mares for miles and miles over rocky terrain in literally sub-zero temperatures until they drop to the floor or until they spontaneously abort their babies. We've been there, we've documented, and we're here to tell you that it is not true. We're here to tell you that the program is deceptive, it's defective, it's unsustainable, and we need to all stand up and say, stop the roundups now. They are concerned with less than 20,000 wild horses left on our public lands. Really? We have over 34 million deer in America. We have over 100,000 elk in America. Nobody seems to be concerned with them. We're really spending millions and millions of dollars of our taxpayer money on removing less than 20,000 wild horses. We're here to tell you enough is enough. Stop the roundups now. Sorry, one more thing. Mr. President Obama, shame on you for letting this go on your watch. All you would have to do is ask your dear friend Ken Salazar to stop the roundups until we can get an independent, accurate confirmation and count of how many wild horses we have left. We don't even know. So why are these roundups continuing? Cruel, cruel roundups at the expense of our taxpayer dollars. This is our message. Stop the roundups now.
Thanks, Simone. To just add on to a little bit of what you said, when the Wild Horse and Burro Act was passed in 1971, 336 areas were identified where wild horses were and burros were allowed to roam, and there's fewer than 186 areas now. So that's how much of a loss, and I think it's 24 million acres, not 21 million acres, and Craig believes it's 56 million acres that have been taken away from the program. Back when the first census was done in the early 1970s, there were over 5,200 burros that were counted. Today there are fewer than 2,000. I wanted to point that out since we are in Arizona, the home of the American burro.
You have to figure it out. Humanity is in deep trouble. We've been in our situation as people standing up for about 400,000 years. We reached 2.5 billion people after 400,000 years in 1950. We've more than doubled since 1950. We have moved further and further and further away from the planet we live on. We have made incredible number of things, planes, cars, all kinds of electricity, everything like that. We have built ourselves up out of caves, but we have moved so far that the balance with the planet we live on is not really there anymore. We're human beings, but despite the fact that we have removed ourselves from life on this earth, we are a part of it. We sleep and wake. We eat and drink. We pee and poop. We live and we die. And every other creature on this planet does the same thing. We are a part of it. And the other creatures on this planet are a part of it too. Do we have to be involved with everybody? No. Do we have to give some feeling that every creature on this planet deserves to stay here? Absolutely. They are a part of this world. If we don't connect with them again, forget it. Wild horses and burros I've been working on them for more than 20 years. The fact of the matter is, our government, the people we elect, they're not necessarily, the majority is not necessarily bad people, but they are corrupt. The United States government doesn't tell us the truth. And it doesn't focus on anything but money. The Bureau of Land Management, I've known for over 20 years. They have never, ever, ever told the truth to me about anything they have done. The only ones that ever told the truth to me were people who whispered to me in the middle of nowhere, with no one around, saying, I can't believe what everybody's been doing. I don't know what to do. I've got to get out of here. And because I'm afraid if I say something, somebody might kill me. That's how bad it is. The only thing that we can do is to come together in a big, big way. And the only way that the wild horses and burros in America will ever continue to exist is if it is stopped immediately. If the Bureau of Land Management continues to tell us, oh, we're doing this and we're doing that, and oh yeah, okay, all right, yeah, all right, the wild horses and burros will be gone forever. They will be out of this earth completely, which is ridiculous. And the fact of the matter is that the Bureau of Land Management is as corrupt, money-wise, and mining-wise, and everything else, as any part of our national government. In fact, in some ways, even more corrupt. They hire criminals not to do roundups, but capturing and killing and slaughtering. That's what happens all the time. Period. The only way that we will be able to proceed to keep America in some kind of balance is if we start to do something in America. Instead of just watching the news every night about telling us about what's going on over in the Middle East. Oh, the poor people, and oh, the corrupt governments. Well, what about America? Are we going to do anything about the country that we live in? We better. And I'll say lastly, and anybody from the press can ask me any question they want, but I will say lastly, that my view, after 20 years of working with the BLM and not working with the BLM, I feel it is time for the BLM to be removed from the American West. And lastly, I will say that the first thing that can be done to remove the BLM from the American West is to do what I'm doing with the international funding of wild horses and burros. We are filing impeachment against the director of the BLM. Period.
Antelope Complex, winter 2011. Near the end of the roundup, observers, including myself, photographed pregnant mares. The number of pregnant mares coming in was considerable. One of the reasons BLM is supposed to shut down a roundup is an abundance of pregnant mares. On February 21st, the public, armed with the appropriate, accurate information, addressed this issue with BLM staff and everyone else they could think of. It was interesting. There was a member of the BLM that asked me how I knew those mares were pregnant from such a distance. My question was, how didn't they know? Those mares and their families were loaded within minutes. There are many other issues with this roundup that have not been addressed, but that roundup stopped 3 days early. I went to see some of the horses in holding. Saw horses being run, and I saw why. There's a new baby in there being separated out to go to the mare and foal pen. This particular mare and foal I haven't seen since. A horse slipped and fell. I stayed and watched. She finally lifted her head, a little bewildered, and stayed with her until she rose, and went on to document an abundance of very pregnant mares. The roundup was called off 3 days early. But what this information also tells us is that foaling season must be addressed. That the current foaling season BLM follows is paper, not actuality. These horses should not be run in January and February, and they should not be run in July. Foaling season needs to be actual foaling season. Some of these babies didn't make it. I don't know how many spontaneous abortions there were or how many babies actually die. That's still not something BLM keeps statistics on, and so we'll never know. That's something else the public needs to ask for, is that those statistics be kept. That a life before it reaches 5 months old still matters to us, and we want to know what happens to them. I will continue to document these horses, continue to bring you the information that I can, and do my best to get more people in the field. Because through information, accurate,
is the only evil in this rotten, cruel world. I see hurt and pain, and I don't know where to turn. And I'm about to break, but my hands won't chop the wood. Is it bad enough for you? Is it bad enough to do some good? I lost the will that the money lender pays. It don't make no difference, 'cause I'm bankrupt in this place. My heart bleeds love, but they took it all away. Is it good enough for you? Is it good enough to make you pray? Rich man, poor man, broken, bullet in the heart, man, nothing trees and forests lose their nature in the breeze. Endangered life on the one we're on our knees. We take the land while the rivers run to dry. Is it good enough for you? Is it good enough to learn to die? Is there only evil in this rotten, cruel world? I see hurt and pain, and I don't know where to turn. And I'm about to break, but my hands won't chop the wood. Is it bad enough for you? Is it bad enough to do some good? Is it bad enough for you? Enough for you? Is it bad enough for you? Is it bad enough for you? Is it bad enough? Is it bad enough? Is it bad enough for you? Oh, is it bad enough for you? 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 Is it bad enough?
Hello, it's Nylene. My full name is Nylene Scholhorn Puha. I live in rural Nevada, and I want to tell you my story about the wild horses. I moved here about 10 years ago from Hawaii, and I bought a little place on 5 acres out in the desert. And one day we stopped working on our place and went to explore. And I live where the Carson River comes into Lake Lahontan. And when we went over there, we found a beautiful herd of about 75 wild horses. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. They were free, and they were in a beautiful setting with plenty of water and food. And I felt as though I had come to a perfect place. And the state park people told me that they were protected by law and they would always be there. And we had 1 year of the wild horses. And then the BLM came in one day and they gave the public 1-day notice. And we got a protest going. I was on the front page of the paper the next day, but they came and they rounded up the wild horses. And we called the press, and the press came, and the press said, "Why are you rounding up these wild horses?" And the BLM said, "Because they're starving." And the press, the reporters said, "No, we can tell. These are fat, healthy horses. They're not starving." It was a lie. And they came and took away the horses, and they left, I think it was 7. And they said, "Well, that's enough." It's not enough. That's not a wild herd. I learned so much from the wild horses. I learned that it's not just the one stallion that breeds. It's the younger guys get in there too and do their thing, and the grandmothers help with the babies. And the head stallion taught me how close I could get. He would watch me, and they kind of got to know me, because for a year I could go out there and visit with them. And they taught me, don't get any closer. And if I did, they'd go across the river. And they always say the wild horses pollute the river. No, they don't. It's the cows. The wild horses cross the river. They don't linger in the river. It's the cows that muddy the rivers. And after the protest, after the roundup, I went back out there And I saw all the prints from the horses, and you could see what had happened from the destruction of the edges of the river and the footprints and the chaos, and you could see it all. And this we have eagles there, and this eagle cried down to me, and it was like he was saying to me, "What happened here? What just happened here?" And I was just so ashamed and angry and heartbroken. And so I became a wild horse activist. And I'll never be the same. I'll never forget that. I felt like evil things had happened, and it was symbolic of what's going on with our entire world. The pollution and the destruction and the wiping out of the wild horses, and it isn't just about wild horses. It's about our entire environment, the salmon and the water and the air and all the wild animals that are being wiped out. Pick a place where you live, anywhere, and pick a wild animal, and the same thing is going on. You know, we're just destroying our world, and the wild horses are just one symbol of what's going on all over. And so I protested, and I wrote articles, and I did whatever I could, and I've come to the conclusion now that the best thing that we can do is become vegetarians. I think that, or vegans, I think that we need to stop what's happening, and the rich and powerful, you know, they have all the power, but there's more of us. The poor people are the majority. We're the people. And we vote with our dollars. And if we can just start thinking that every time we buy something, where we buy, where we shop, what we're buying, what's in our food, that we can stop this. We can fight back. We don't have to just accept this because we're poor people. We have to. This is our planet. This is our children's future. We have to. And I think that we need a beef boycott. We can start with that for the wild horses. Boycott beef. You know, and we're not all going to work out everything that, you know, you can eat this and you can't eat that, but we can start with that. That's simple. Boycott beef. No more beef. Just stop. Because these ranchers, they have all the power. They have the power. We fight in the courts, and we organize and protest, and we're getting nowhere. There's less and less wild horses than when we started. And so I think that that's the best thing we can all do. Paul McCartney said, the single most important thing a person can do to help save the world is to become a vegetarian. And I think that it's not just the health issues, but the political issues. You know, these people raise these animals for the profit that they make. And I think that we need to really think about what we're eating and why, and how we can help fight back. We now grow gardens on my 5 acres, and last summer we sold at the farmers markets. And I think that we can do this with using vegetarianism as a beginning. I think that we all need to realize what's going on and to start fighting back. I would like to organize a group of wild horse vegetarians. I think this is now the best way that we can fight to save the wild horses. I urge everyone to join me in this. I think that it would be very effective, and we need to find each other and organize our own group.
Email?
Oh, my email is witchyny@hotmail.com. WITCHYNY@hotmail.com. Please email me. Thank you.
This is Route 44 heading towards Mount Shasta from Susanville, California.
And I want all you folks to take a look at this beautiful, gorgeous, empty land where horses and buffalo could roam. And you don't see a single solitary wild animal here. This land should be filled with it. But our government and the people that lobby, all they want is cattle. And you can see in the distance a few grazing herds. This is what, in my opinion, your meat-eating habit for the cheap burger has done to our land. Because of cattle ranching all over the world, forests are cut down, wild horses are taken away from their homes, and bison, everything is culled in the name of overpopulation, and the only thing left are these small cattle grazing herds. So ranchers rule the roost, but you, my friends, you really rule the roost. So put your money where your mouth is and save this beautiful land and all that is so gorgeous that goes with it, our native wild horses and our wonderful wild, wild life. Now we're in the Cisco Forest in California, and you can see this beautiful forest lining our highway. But it's very deceiving because behind this beautiful scenery, see, they cover it up because they know that it would enrage us, because you see, people, they need beauty. We love beauty. And so we really get upset when our forests are mistreated. The people do. And they know that, so they hide. They hide the massacre behind a mask of a few trees, knowing that most people will just never know the true massacre that the U.S. Forest Service allows. Look at this devastation, folks. Unbelievable. They haven't left a tree. They've taken the big ones too, and the big ones are the ones that don't burn like the little ones, and they protect the forest from forest fires. But the timber science, made up by the timber industry, in my opinion, and many other botanists and biologists, they all know that timber science is very pro-timber. And this is timber science, folks. This is what it looks like. They teach it in colleges, you know, that the big trees are causing global warming because they're old. Well, let me tell you, the big trees and those big trunks, they're storing the carbon. And when they cut it down, that's when they release the carbon. And they've left one little tiny little tree right here. This is so devastating. This is what your national forest people are doing. Unbelievable, isn't it? And yet they're removing all the wild horses that belong here under the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act. There's several U.S. Forest Service U.S. forests where the wild horse still is allowed to roam. And yet the U.S. Forest Service officials, higher-ups, Department of Interior, your Ken Salazar, who needs to resign because he's destroying our forest. He's destroying our wildlife under the leniency and election of President Obama.